Hello friends, today I would like to share some information on two religions, namely Zoroastrianism and Christianity. Though the birthplace of both religions was not India, but have played great role in the development of socio-cultural and religious aspect of Indian history and its culture so far. The biological mother of multitude religions, India has also mothered religions from the world over with equal love and affection. Little wonder then that today it is a boiling pot of copious religions, all existing in a cheerful harmony. The religious tolerance of its people and the communal harmony that its democracy uphold makes it a truly unique country on the face of earth. The Hindu religion forms the majority of its population, while other faiths like Sikh, Christians, Muslims, Buddhists, Jains, to some extent Parsis also, monastic faith represent one or the sum of this most important minority. All these religions have contributed in their own way for the development of art, literature, philosophy, spiritual consciousness, and the fabric of the society on the whole. The message of love and brotherhood is expressed by all the religions and cultures of India. Whether it is the rows of the faithful bowing in prayer in the courtyard of a mosque or the rows of lamps that light up house at Diwali, the good cheer of Christmas or the bonhomie of the Baisakhi, the festival of India are celebrations of shared emotion that bring people together. People from the different religions and cultures of India unite in a common cord of brotherhood and amity in this fascinating and diverse land that is India. In the 1991 census, 82% of the population was enumerated as Hindus. However, 12% of Indians are Muslim, a fact that makes this one of the largest Islamic nations in the world. The next largest religious category is Christians, who make up only over 2% of the population and are closely followed in number by Sikh. The only other groups of numerical significance are the Buddhists, which are less than 1%, and the Jains, who are also less than 0.5%. A community in whose religious ceremonies the invocation of fire occupies a central place, who wear the sacred thread, whose ancestors worshipped God named Mitravayu, Veretraghna, whose society was traditionally divided into various orders of priests, warriors, peasants, who consider themselves descendants of the Aryans, a race which originally lived in the subarctic regions near the North Pole. This obviously is a description of the Aryan settlers of India. Yes, but it applies equally well to the ancestors of the inhabitants of Iran and the Zoroastrian Parsis who migrated from Iran and settled in India around 900 CE. Let's just cover certain important aspect of this peculiar religion and the people called Parsis. Parsis, a member of one of the religious communities of India, number more than 1 lakh as per the census of 1973. They live chiefly in Bombay and are descendants of the Zoroastrian who fled Iran during the 7th to 10th centuries after the conquest of Iran by the Arabs, and who settles primarily in Gujarat. Their religion is Zoroastrianism. The Parsis worshipped fire in their temples. They do not bury their dead, but allow them to be torn to pieces by vultures in Tower of Silence, in order not to defile the elements sacred to them: fire, water, air, and earth. Material prosperity is considered the reward of religious virtues, and therefore the majority of the Parsis have long occupied themselves with money lending, trade, banking, and entrepreneurial activity. The Tatars, a family of the largest monopolists in India, are Parsis. The Parsis speak Gujarati, while the canonical literature is written in Avestan and Pahlavi. The Parsi community is predominantly endogamous, although the young people have begun to deviate from the ancient marriage regulation. The priests exert a great influence not only upon the religious but upon the secular life of the Parsis. India is richer today due to the contribution of a tiny community. In the sciences, the arts, industry, Parsis have given back more than 1,000-fold in return to the land that gave them shelter 1,000 years ago. But they are a dying community. With UNESCO stepping in to help preserve their heritage, their story is one that must be told, read, and preserved. Parsis are of ancient Persian descent and belong to the Indo-European branch of the Aryans. The word Iran itself derives from the Avestan Aryana, Sanskrit Aryayan, or the way of the Aryans, that becomes Irya-an or Iran, according to the scholar historian Pilu Nanavati. Unlike other foreigners who came to India to plunder, loot, and rule, the Parsis assimilated with a quiet dignity into India's history and contributed their extraordinary genius in every walk of life. As intelligent refugees, while guarding their own ethnic, cultural, and religious identity with fierce pride, they were always mindful of their status and made friends wherever they went. As an ethnic group, Parsis have excelled in a way no other community has, and it would seem that their upbringing and strong religious belief may be the reason for this. There is in the Zoroastrian creed a simplicity that defies challenge. Be good, do good, think good, and fight evil. Be responsible for yourself and don't blame others. Listen to your conscience but laugh and enjoy life. Look after your own people, and so on. From the time a child is able to understand social dynamics, right and wrong are clearly defined, and the child is made responsible for his or her thoughts, words, and deeds. No wonder that when a Parsi child goes wrong, it's a reality. The whole community hangs its head in sorrow and shame. To discover their ancestry, we have to retrace our steps all the way to the Iranian Bronze Age, somewhere between 2600 and 2000 BC, taking the linguistic similarity between the Rig Veda and the Zoroastrian Gathas as a benchmark. A fiery young man named Spitama or Zarathustra was born in the beautiful city of Arak in Azerbaijan with a divine sign. At the age of 15, Zarathustra turned away from worldly pleasures and devoted his life to the worship of God. At 20, he went to meditate in a cave. The problem of evil, the mystery of human existence, and the riddle of the universe were the questions that he sought to answer. Zarathustra came back face to face with his god, Ahura Mazda, and the Gathas that form the verses of Zoroastrianism came from his daily communication or communion with him. Fire is given pride of the place in the Gathas as a bright and powerful creation of Ahura Mazda, preferable to idols or other objects symbolizing divinity. However, fire worship is not mentioned anywhere, despite a common misconception of Parsis being fire worshipper. Zoroastrianism is the world's oldest revealed religion, predating Christianity by more than a couple of millennia. Despite its birth in prehistory, the religion survived. It has survived persecution, the destruction of close to 90% of its recorded history and tenets, migration to distant land, and the assimilation of alien customs and languages. The core beliefs have remained intact because these beliefs are practical, life-driving forces that Parsis have always lived by, no matter where they were forced to settle down over the ages. Resist evil is a credo of the true Zoroastrian. The Prophet demands his followers active participation in fighting evil wholeheartedly, a militancy that is absent in other creeds that preach a turning of the blind eye and even forgiveness in the face of what is wicked. This constant endeavor to remain on the side of the good and the just helped in building a character where responsibility, effort, industry, courage, justice, truthfulness, and self-sacrifice were traditionally ingrained. Parsism or Zoroastrianism is about 2600 years old and finds its origin in Persia. The Parsis believe that the Ahura Mazda is eternally in conflict with Angra Mainyu or Ahir Man, who represent the evil force. Man has a free will to align himself to good or evil. Soul is immortal, and upon death the good go to heaven and evil fall into hell. The Parsis believe in the coming of the Saoshyant, Savior, to the earth to defeat evil and further righteousness, Ashoy. They believe that when the Saoshyant come, the final spiritual battle between the forces of good and evil will commence, resulting in the utter destruction of evil. Ristakils, the resurrection of the dead, will take place. The dead will rise by the will of Ahura Mazda, and the final judgment of all the souls will commence at the hands of Ahura Mazda, the judge, Dava, and all sinners punished, then forgiven, and humanity made immortal, free from hunger, thirst, poverty, old age, disease, and death. Wow. The Parsis' place of worship is called the fire temple. 5 daily prayers, usually hymns or gathas, uttered by Prophet Zarathustra, are said in the home or the temple. Before a fire which symbolizes the realm of truth, righteousness, and order. The fire temple and rituals of the yasnas are sacred and are necessary for the religion, such as the Nirangadan ceremony, which creates the holy Nirang. Fire is regarded as a son of Ahura Mazda, which represents God. In Zoroastrianism, Dakhma Nashini is the only method of corpse destruction. This involves the destruction of the dead body in the stone enclosed Dakhma by the flesh-eating bird or the rays of the sun. The religious book of the Parsis is called Zend Avesta, which includes a number of sections in archaic language attributed to Zoroaster and which preserve the cult of the fire sacrifice as a focus of ritual life. The religious and ritual life of pious Parsi revolves around sacred fires. The most important rite for most lay Parsis is a Navjot. It is performed when a person is between the age group of 7 and 15. It initiates the young person into the adult community of the Parsis. The Navjot ceremony involves purifying bathing, reciting Avesta based scripture, and being invested with the sacred shirt and waist thread called kusti that should always be worn after the ceremony. The dead Parsis are disposed of by exposure to vultures, dakhmas, on the Tower of Silence. Let's cover certain aspects of the religious scriptures of the Parsis. Zenda Avesta is the religious scriptures of the Parsis. It contains the teachings, sermons, and prayers composed by the Prophet Zoroaster himself and also by his disciples and followers. Avesta is also the name of the language in which it is composed. It is divided into 5 parts: the yasna, worship with ceremony and offerings; the Dad, laws against demons; the yashta, worship; the Korade Avesta, which comprise of selected portions of the Avesta and forms the book of daily prayers of the Zoroastrians; and the 5 gathas, which are Ahunaveti, Ushtaveti, Spenta Menu, Vohu Khashrata, and Vashishta Ishti, which contain the 17 hymns of God received by Prophet Zarathustra by way of a divine revelation. There are 3 principal sects among the Parsis: Shahenshai, Kadmi and Fasli. The only difference between the three sects is the calendar they adhere to. The Faslis follow the traditional the Persian calendar. The Shahinshahis calculate the calendar from the last Sasanian king, Yezdegerd III, and the Kadmis claim the calendar is the oldest and the most accurate. Though the total number of Zoroastrian in Indian population is very less, yes, but they continue to be one of the important religious communities of India. According to this 2001 census, there were around 70,000 members of the Zoroastrian faith in India. Most of the Parsis live in Maharashtra, mainly in Mumbai, and the rest in Gujarat. Zoroastrians or the Parsis are mainly the descendants of the 10th century immigrants from Persia. Though the number of Zoroastrian in India is alarmingly low, yet they wield great influence because of their financial position. The level of Zoroastrian population is ascribed to migration, low birth, late marriages, non-marriages, divorce and infertility. In the beginning, the Parsi or the Zoroastrians were engaged in shipbuilding and trade activities and were located in the ports and towns of Gujarat. Slowly and gradually, their entrepreneurial skills saw them expanding and controlling trade and commerce. With colonial expansion, they got more trading opportunities and substantial number of Parsis moved to Bombay. From then onwards, Mumbai or Bombay served as a base for expanding their business activities throughout India and abroad. Sanjan, Navsari and Udwada, towns in Gujarat, are of great importance to Parsi as they served as community centers before the Zoroastrians or Parsis migrated to Bombay in the 19th century. The Zoroastrian enjoyed the benefit of Western commercial contacts and English language education and expanded their commercial dominance rapidly and became the most cosmopolitan community in India during the British rule. In modern India, Parsis are the most urban, elite and wealthy of almost all the religious groups of India. Parsis have played an important role in the development of trade, industry, finance, philanthropy, which has earned them an important place in India's social and economic life. Many of the Parsis or Zoroastrians have earned accolades in government services and law. The Parsis are India's smallest minority community, yet they have exercised a huge influence on the country. As pioneers in education in 19th century India and as leading figures in banking, commerce, medicine, law, journalism, they were at the forefront of India's industrial revolution. Parsis were also at the heart of the creation of Indian National Congress in the 19th century and contributed some of the great leaders through into the 20th century. Dadabhai Nauroji, Nauroji Fardunji and others set up the Rahnumai Mazdasan Sabha, the Religious Reform Association, in 1851 to carry out campaigns against the strict orthodoxy in Zoroastrianism. They laid special emphasis on organizing the Parsis and raising the social status of women by providing for their education. The first Zoroastrian to enter India arrived on the Gujarat coast in the 10th century, and by the 17th century, most of them had settled in Bombay. Today, there are approximately 90,000 Parsis in India and are concentrated largely in Maharashtra and Gujarat. Starting with business and industry, through law and literature, including the armed forces, and spanning the arts, music, nuclear science, Parsis always gave more than they took from their adopted land. A large number of Parsis settled in Bombay when famine struck Gujarat in 1790. The city's cosmopolitan outlook and its dynamic vitality brought out the Parsis' natural zest for life. And it became a springboard for some of the most talented men and women from that community to take flight in their varied areas of expertise. The names of eminent Parsis roll off like a veritable who's who of eminent Indians. Dadabhai Nauroji, Sir Jamshedji Tata, J.R.D. Tata, Ratan Tata, Wadiyas, the Godrej clan, Homi Bhabha, Sam Manekshaw, Madam Bhikaji Kama, Zubin Mehta, Sodi Sorabji, Fali Nariman and others too numerous to list. In India, Parsis in general assimilated into the culture prevalent in Gujarat without relinquishing their own traditions that were bequeathed orally down the ages. This oral tradition included prayers, customs and rites of passage and some heroic legends that are still extant. Jealously guarded by the elders but not extensively known by the younger generation. Most Parsis speak Gujarati and most women choose to drape their saris the Gujarati way, with the pallu across the chest from the right shoulder and tucked behind the waist on the left. Down the century, many social and cultural customs of Gujarat have become intrinsic part of Parsi tradition in dance, music and cuisine. But the religion has remained pristine and the core beliefs have kept them a people apart. We always talk about the Parsis' rites of passage. Let's cover certain important aspect of that. Parsis have distinct rites of passage that starts at birth and solidify with the Navjot, literally new light, ceremony, which is similar to the Jewish bar mitzvah and the Hindu thread ceremony. The child, whether it is male or female, is blessed and inducted into the Zoroastrian way by donning a sacred thread which they call kusti and a soft muslin undershirt which they call it sudraha or sudra, a tradition that predates Zarathustra. She or he is initiated into the faith through prayers and community blessings. There is a great similarity here with the Jewish custom of initiation into the faith. The marriage ceremony that always takes place after sunset is a joyous affair and among some includes the Western custom of the groom kissing the bride. Both the Navjot and the marriage ceremony embody the spirit of free choice. In both ceremonies, the individuals are asked if they embrace the faith or the partner freely of their own choice. The final rite of the passage is still the most authentic and considered truly alien because Parsis take their dead to designated enclosed places called dokhma or dakhma, euphemistically known as a tower of silence. The corpse is left in the open for scavenging birds to dispose of and emanates from the Parsi belief in doing good right up to the end. A week or so later, the dried bones are lowered into the deep pit, layered with sand and charcoal for decomposition. In all of the above ceremonies, a sacred fire fed with sandalwood and incense play a pivotal role. Between birth and death, however, is where the real Parsi story takes place. Parsis are a community of doers and givers. The authentic life celebrating philosophy of the Zoroastrian make the Parsis zest for life a refreshing contrast to the moaning and groaning interpretation that many Hindus, Muslims and Christians have given to their own lively tradition. A Parsi will laugh and drink and party, but she or he will also work hard to achieve and give and build. Despite its intrinsic gentleness, there is nothing timid in the Zoroastrian way of life. We always talk about the killer genes for which UNESCO has also undertaken the project to save the Parsi community. We are just going to cover in short about those killer genes. Indian Parsis travel to other parts of the world to settle down in every continent. Yet, the total number of Parsi today is an alarming 63,000 only. It was determined in a long-drawn legal battle that ended in 1908 that you had to be born a Parsi, you could not convert to become one, you could become a Zoroastrian but not a Parsi. So, Parsi married within their limited community And as happened with Egyptian nobility, thousands of years ago, the Parsi blood thinned and became a feeding ground for genetic diseases. The killer genes simply got passed down the line until Parsis are now a community prone to hemophilia, osteoporosis, and cancer. For many years, inter-community marriages were heavily frowned upon, but today it may be the only means of saving a vibrant group of people from dying out on us. And it is not just the race that is in jeopardy of extinction. The entire Parsi tradition, if you recall, was orally transmitted down the ages. With a thinning number in the younger generation and a larger group of elders, this tradition is in vital need of documentation and preservation. The UNESCO has made a gesture in this direction by creating a forum and giving a small donation as seed money for a project called Parzor to retrieve and record what is left of the Parsi way of life. The project coordinator, the dynamic Dr. Sharzan Kama, says the project is in desperate need of help from both Parsis and others who are interested in preserving this community history. We need men, material and money to travel to places, document stories, legends and artifacts on film and even physically. We plan a museum, a library and films. Let's cover the Zoroastrianism aspect there in the Gujarat. Some Zoroastrian Persians migrated to India after the fall of the Sasanian Empire and gave rise to the modern Indian Parsi community. According to a chronicle written in the 17th century, the Kissa-e-Sanjan, the Parsis first came to India in 8th century. They landed in Diu and were later given refuge in Sanjan, a place in Gujarat, by the local king Jadi Rana. 5 years after this, they built the first fire temple, Atash Behram, to shelter the holy fire rescued from Iran. Over the years, this community acculturated the new land Gujarati, became the native language of the community, and the sari, the garment of the women. However, the Parsis preserved their separate cultural and religious identity. Towards the end of the 10th century, the Parsis began to settle in other parts of the Gujarat. This gave rise to difficulties in defining the limits of priestly jurisdiction, which was resolved in 1290 AD by the establishment of 5 pankhas or the districts Sarjan, Nausari, Godara, Ankleshwar, Broj and Cambe. Late in the 15th century, Sanjan was attacked by a Muslim army, probably a war of conquest by the 6th Sultan of Gujarat. The Parsis supported the local Hindu king with 1400 men and was annihilated. The survivors fled with the holy fire, which was installed in Nausari in 1516. Later, due to disputes between priests, it was transferred and came to the present location at Udwara in 1742. Now in Bombay, from the 16th century, Surat became a major center of trade and more Parsi migrated to this town. The newly arrived European traders preferred to conduct business through this community, since their status as a minority gave them the necessary flexibility in their new role as brokers. The first record of a Parsi, Dorabji Nanabhai, settling in Bombay dates from 1640. After 1661, when Bombay passed to the British, there was a concerted effort to bring artisans and traders to settle in the new town. Ongiers wrote a letter to the factor in Surat on November 21, 1647 to invite as many weavers as possible, whereinto you will promise them such privileges, immunities and exemption from public duty as they shall reasonably desire from you. A large part of the Parsi migrants to Bombay in these years was constituted of weavers and other artisans. In 1673, the British handed over a piece of land in Malabar Hills to the Parsi community for the establishment of their first dakhma, the Tower of Silence. In 1735, Lauji Nasirwanji, a master shipbuilder, was granted land in Bombay by the East India Company. He took the name of his trade, Wadia, and moved on to the developing town. Incidentally, the Wadias built the ship Minden, on board which Francis Scott Key composed the US national anthem, Star Spangled Banner. In 1780, 9.2% of the population of Bombay was Parsis. A first wave of migration followed of Amin in Gujarat in 1790. By 1812, the number of Parsis in Bombay had quadrupled. In 1837, a second large wave of migration to Bombay followed a huge fire in Surat. Today, more than 70% of all Parsis live in Bombay. The Parsis are intimately connected with the history of Bombay. The cotton boom was largely fueled by Parsi entrepreneurs. The oldest newspaper in Bombay, Bombay Samachar, was run by Parsis. Congress stalwarts like Dadabhai Naoroji, Firoz Shah Mehta, Dinshaw Wacha were Parsis. One of India's biggest industrial houses was founded by a Parsi, Jamshedji Tata. Even the physical shape of Bombay was determined by donation to build causeways, roads, buildings by members of Jijibhoy and Ready Money families. Since some of the Avesta prayers contain references to the name of the month and some other prayers are used here and there at specific times of the year, the issue of which calendar is correct has theological ramifications as well. To further complicate matters, in the late 1700s or early 1800s, a highly influential head priest and staunch proponent of the Kadmi calendar, Feroz Kaus Dastoor of the Dadi Seth Atash Behram in Bombay, became convinced that the pronunciation of prayers as recited by visitors from Iran was correct, while the pronunciation as used by the Parsis was not. He accordingly went on to alter some, but not all, of the prayers, which in due course came to be accepted by all adherents of the Kadmi calendar as a most ancient and thus presumably correct also. However, scholars of the Avestan language and linguistic contribute the difference in pronunciation to a vowel shift that occurred only in Iran, and that the Iranian pronunciation as adopted by Kadmis is actually more recent than the pronunciation used by the non-Kadmi Parsis. The calendar disputes were not always purely academic either. In the 1780, emotions over the controversy ran so high that violence would occasionally erupt. In 1783, a Shahanshai resident of Bharuch named Homaji Jamshedji was sentenced to death for kicking a young Kadmi woman and so causing her to miscarry. Of the 8 Atash Behrams, the highest grade of the fire temple in India, 3 follow the Kadmi pronunciation and calendar, the other 5 are Shahanshai. The Fasilis do not have their own Atash Behram. The Ilm-e-Khushnum, science of ecstasy or science of bliss, is a school of Parsi Zoroastrian philosophy based on a mystic and esoteric rather than literal interpretation of religious text. According to the adherents of the sect, they are followers of Zoroastrian faith as preserved by a clan of 2000 individuals called the Sahib-e-Dilan, masters of the heart, who are said to live in complete isolation in the mountainous recesses of the Caucasus, alternately in the Alborz range around Mount Damavand. The largest community of followers of the Khushnum lives in Jogeshwari, a suburb of Bombay, where they have their own fire temple, Behram Shah Naorozi Shroff De Meher, their own housing colony, Behram Bagh, and their own newspaper, Parsi Pukar. There is a smaller concentration of adherents in Surat, where the sect was founded in the last decades of the 19th century. It has been traditional in Mumbai and Karachi, at least, for dead Parsis to be taken to the Tower of Silence, where the corpses would quickly be eaten by the city's vultures. The reason given for the practice is that earth, fire and water are all considered as sacred elements which should not be defiled by the dead. Therefore, burial and cremation have always been prohibited in Parsi culture. The problem today, though, is that in Mumbai and Karachi, the population of vultures has been drastically reduced due to extensive urbanization as well as due to poisoning by the anti-inflammatory drug diclofenac, which is often given to the humans and cattle. As a result, the bodies of the deceased are taking much longer to decompose, and this has upset certain sectors of the community. Solar panels have been installed in the Tower of Silence to speed up the decomposition process, but this has only been partially successful. There is a debate raging among the community as to whether the prohibition on burial and cremation should not be lifted. The Tower of Silence in Mumbai is located at Malabar Hills. The residents of Malabar Hills and surrounding areas have also complained against this practice. Parsis are now given an option of burial versus the Tower of Silence death ritual. The Parsis have made considerable contributions to the history and development of India, all the more remarkable considering their small number. As the maxim, Parsi, thy name is charity, reveals, their greatest contribution, literally and figuratively, is their philanthropy. The term Parsi in Sanskrit means one who gives alms. Gandhiji would note in a much misquoted statement, I am proud of my country India for having produced the splendid Zoroastrian stock. In number, beneath contempt, but in charity and philanthropy perhaps unequaled and certainly unsurpassed. Modern India owes a large debt to the visionary Jamshedji Tata, who had the foresight to lay a firm foundation that would allow India to be economically independent. His descendant J.R.D. Tata took over the running of the Tata Sons and expanded the business empire even further. A keen aviator, J.R.D. was the first Indian to start a national airline, Tata Airlines, and later became Air India. Parsis also established the first cotton mills in India, the first newspaper, the first Indian-owned bank. In the Navy, we had Admiral Jal Kutsedzi, in the Air Force, Air Marshal Engineer, and the Indian Army was commanded by another Parsi, Field Marshal Sam Manek Shah. The late Prime Minister Rajiv Gandhi's father, Feroz Gandhi, also came from this community. And of course, there is Zubin Mehta, who belongs collectively to every Parsi mother. Dadabhai Naoroji, the grand old man of India, was the first to formulate and articulate the economic drain theory in his book, Poverty and Un-British Rule in India, published in 1901. He fought for the Indianization of Indian civil services and protested vehemently against the extravagant expenditure on military expenditure against Afghanistan. Burma, Egypt, undertaken at the Indian taxpayers' expense for the glory of England. To educate the British public and to fight for Indian rights, in 1892 he stood for election to the British House of Commons as a Liberal from Central Finsbury, London. He won by 3 votes and his constituents nicknamed him Mr. Narrow Majority. He was the first Indian to beat the British at their own game. The conservative press did their best to stir up racial prejudice against him. Central Finsbury should be ashamed of itself at having publicly confessed that there was not in the whole of the division an Englishman, a Scotsman, a Welshman or an Irishman as worthy of their votes as this fire worshipper from Bombay. In 1893, Dadabhai Naoroji expressed the spirit of an emerging national identity when he stated, whether I am a Hindu, a Mohammedan, a Parsi, a Christian, or of any other creed, I am above all an Indian. Our country is India, our nationality is Indian. In 1895, he was appointed to the Royal Commission on Indian Expenditure. He returned to India and was thrice elected to the post of the President of the Indian National Congress in 1886, 1893 and again in 1906. In 1893, Dadabhai Naoroji expressed the spirit of an emerging national identity when he stated, "Whether I am a Hindu, a Mohammedan, Parsi, Christian, I am an Indian." The Congress demand for Swaraj, independence, was first expressed publicly by him in his presidential address in 1906. The second in this category comes the Madam Bhikaji Cama. Our radical firebrand was exiled from India and Britain and lived in France. Bhikaji was a tireless propagandist for Indian independence. Russian comrades used to call her India's Joan of Arc. Lenin reportedly invited her to reside in Russia, but she did not accept the invitation. In 1907, she addressed an audience of 1,000 Germans at the Stuttgart Conference. After her impassioned speech, Anne unfurled a flag, a tricolour, which became, with some changes, India's national flag 40 years later. As her activities grew more radical, the British requested the French to extradite her. The French refused in 1936 alone, and seriously ill, wishing to die in her own country, she petitioned the British government to be allowed to return home. Her request was granted, provided she signed what she had refused to all her life, a statement promising that she would take no part in politics. She returned to Bombay and after an illness of 8 months died lonely, forgotten and unsung in the Parsi General Hospital. Next person is Firoz Shah Mehta. In 1890, as President of Indian National Congress, Firoz Shah Mehta delivered the presidential address in which he said, "In speaking of myself as a native of this country, I am not unaware that, incredible as it may seem, Parsis have been both called and invited and allured to call themselves foreigners." He saw through the British tactics of binding Parsi loyalty to the crown. They repeatedly made Parsis feel superior by showering them with decorations and praise. Up until 1946, a total of 63 Parsis had been knighted. Of the 4 Indians who had been made hereditary baronets until 1908, 3 were Parsis. In 1877, Sir J. R. Karnak, Governor of Bombay, declared, "Then, gentlemen Parsis, I would ask you to remember that you have what is called the very bluest blood in Asia." Known as the father of municipal government in Bombay, he drafted the Bombay Municipal Act of 1872. He was the municipal commissioner in 1873 and the chairman in 1884-85 and again in 1905. A lawyer by profession, Firoz Shah Mehta was elected the President of the Indian National Congress in 1890. He founded the newspaper Bombay Chronicle in 1910, and the same year he was made the Vice Chancellor of the Bombay University. Studied at Elphinstone College, Bombay, and later went to England to study law. He was called to the bar in 1868. Next personality, Homi Jahangir Bhabha, renowned scientist. Homi Bhabha served as the president of UN Conference on Peaceful Uses of Atomic Energy in 1955 and later as president of International Union of Pure and Applied Physics from 1960 to 63. Bhabha joined the Indian Institute of Science, Bangalore in 1940 as a reader in physics. He then established with funds from J.R.D. Tata the Tata Institute of Fundamental Research in Bombay in 1945. Son of a barrister, Homi Bhabha studied engineering at Cambridge. He died in a plane crash on Mont Blanc on January 24, 1966. It's historically proven now that Parsis have made considerable contributions to the history and development of India, all the more remarkable considering this small number. As a maxim, Parsis, thy name is charity, reveals their greatest contribution, literally and figuratively, is their philanthropy. Gandhiji would note in much misquoted statement, "I am proud of my country, India, for having produced a splendid Zoroastrian stock, in number beneath contempt, but in charity and philanthropy perhaps unequaled and certainly unsurpassed." Now to cover another important religion in India which has just left its footprint on Indian culture is Christianity. By tradition, Christianity is said to have arrived in India with Saint Thomas, one of the apostles of Jesus Christ, who spent some time in South India and possibly died there. However, others believe that the first missionary arrived in the country was Saint Bartholomew. Historically, Christian missionary activity started with the advent of Saint Francis Xavier in 1544. He was followed by Portuguese missionaries at first and eventually by missionaries from other countries like Denmark, Holland, Germany and Great Britain. Throughout the 18th and the 19th century, Catholics as well as Protestant missionaries preached Christian doctrines in India and also made important contribution to social improvement and education in India. Much of the modern influence in the Indian society be attributed to the role of Christianity in India. Christian missionaries helped in setting schools and colleges all over India and also spread the message of faith and goodwill in the country. Christianity and its teaching influenced a number of intellectuals and thinkers in India, including Mahatma Gandhi. Today, the Christians in India number about 30 million, which consists of people from every denomination of Christianity. Christianity in India's third largest religion with approximate 24 million followers constituting 2.3% of India's population. The works of scholars and Eastern Christian writings state that Christianity was introduced to India by Thomas the Apostle, who visited Madurai in Kerala in 52 CE to proselytize amongst Kerala's Jewish settlement. However, this is widely disputed due to lack of credible historical evidence. Today, Christians are found all across India and in all walks of life, with major populations in parts of South India, the Konkan coast and the Northeast. The Christian Church runs thousands of educational institutions, hospitals and has contributed significantly in the development of the nation. Most Christians in India are Catholics. The Eastern rites include the Syro Malabar Catholics Church and the Malankara Orthodox Syrian Church, which are prominent in Kerala. Other churches include the Mar Thoma Syrian Church, Church of South India CSI, the Church of North India CNI, Presbyterian Church of India, Pentecostal Church, the Pentecostal Mission and other evangelical groups. About 2.5% of India's population are Christians. Christianity arrived in India almost about the same period as it arrived in Europe, meaning about 2000 years ago. Christianity originates in Israel. The first Christians were Jews, and in the beginning Christianity was seen as a Jewish cult. Most of the apostles of the Christians acted in Europe to convert the Europeans to Christianity. But one of the apostles, Saint Judas Thomas, arrived in India and converted Indians to Christianity. Saint Thomas was a carpenter and a disciple of Jesus. He was brought to India by a merchant to build a temple. Saint Thomas arrived in Kerala in South India in 52 AD. He succeeded in converting local Indians to Christianity. His converts were called Syrian Christians. One assumption says that some of the Syrian Christians were actually Jews converted by Saint Judas Thomas to Christianity. The disciples of Jesus at first intended to convince the Jews to adopt the philosophy of Jesus as new Judaism. Later on, other Christian saints arrived to India as missionaries, but most of the Indians were converted to Christianity by the missionaries who arrived in India with the European power from 15th century onward. The European power arrived in India for commercial reasons, especially spices, but they also started converting local Indians to Christianity. 5 European countries sent their representative to India: Great Britain, France, Denmark, Netherlands and Portugal. Of the 5 European powers, the Portuguese were most enthusiastic to baptize Indians. The Portuguese were the first European power to arrive in India. Their first ship under the leadership of Vasco da Gama, arrived in South India in 1498 after it had circled the whole continent of Africa. The Portuguese, inspired by the Pope's order to baptize people around the world, not only fought wars against the local Indian rulers, but they even tried to enforce their Roman Catholic prayers on Syrian Christians. After many wars, the Portuguese were defeated by local rulers, and they had only one big pocket of control in India, Goa. The Portuguese not only fought the Indian rulers, but they also fought against other European powers in India, especially Dutch and English. Many Portuguese churches in Kerala were turned into English and Dutch churches after they were captured by these powers. The English missionaries started acting in India at a much later period. The British, unlike the Portuguese, did not allow the missionaries to enter their territories in the beginning. The British arrived in India in 1600 and they allowed the missionaries to enter their territory only from 1813. The British allowed different churches to establish missionaries in their territory. The missionaries didn't only spread Christianity, but they also did humanitarian deeds, giving the needy basic necessities of life like food, clothes, shelter. The missionaries also built schools in India, and many of them even today have Christians or European originated name. The British church missionaries succeeded less than the Portuguese in converting Indians to Christianity. But unlike the Portuguese who tried to enforce Christianity, these Protestant converts were voluntary. The Portuguese were also aware of the Indian customs, according to which the wife followed her husband's faith and therefore married their men to Indian women. There were about 30 million Christians in India. The major centers of Christianity in India are Kerala, Tamil Nadu, Goa, Manipur and Mizoram. There is also a big community of Christians in Mumbai. The main division of Christians in India is like in the Christians world. Protestants, Catholics, there are also different denominations among them. Syrian Church, Armenian Church, Anglican Church and others. Most of the Indian Christians are converted by the Portuguese. There is also an Anglo-Indian community in India. Christianity arrived in India much before it reached Europe, so it is said that the first surviving church in the world is in India. Some scholars argue that Jesus spent his 20s in India, and it is generally believed that the wise men from the East were sages from India. So the intermingling of Christianity and Indian religion has taken place ever since the birth of Christianity. The St. Thomas Christians are an ancient body of Christians in southwestern India who trace their origin to the evangelical activity of Thomas in the 1st century. Within India, members of these churches are sometimes known as Syrian Malabar Nasranis. The 4 major groups, all centered on the Malabar coast of the Indian state of Kerala, are the Syro-Malabar, the Syro-Malankara, the Syrians Orthodox and the Mar Thoma. Whatever their early history, from at least the 6th century, the St. Thomas Christians were part of the Church of the East, also known as Nestorian Church, centered in Persia. In the 8th century, the community was organized as one of the church provinces of the exterior. The St. Thomas Christians were greatly affected by the arrival of the Portuguese beginning in 1498. The Portuguese attempted to bring the community under the auspices of the Latin Rite Catholicism, resulting in permanent rifts in the community. The traditions go back to the 1st century Christians' thought and the 7 churches established by St. Thomas the Apostle during his mission in Malabar. These are at Kodungalur, Mujiris, Paravur, Palayurur, Kokamangalam, Niranam, Chayal and Kollam. About the Syrian Malabar Nasranis, they were the ethnic people and a single community. As a community with common cultural heritage and cultural traditions, they refer to themselves as Nasranis. However, as a religious group, they refer to themselves as Mar Thoma Christianitikal as English or Saint Thomas Christians, based on their religious traditions flowing from the early church of Saint Thomas Christians or Saint Thomas tradition of Christianity. Throughout Kerala, one can find Christian families that claim their descent from ancestors who were baptized by Apostle Thomas. Saint Thomas Christians were classified into the caste system according to their profession, with special privileges for trade granted by the benevolent kings who ruled the area. After the 8th century, when Hindu kingdoms came to sway, Christians were expected to strictly abide by stringent rules pertaining to caste and religion. This became a matter of survival. This is why St. Thomas Christians had such a strong sense of caste and tradition, being the oldest order of Christianity in India. The churches were modeled after Jewish synagogue. The church is neat and they keep it sweetly. There are mats but no seats. Instead of the images, they have some useful writing from the Holy Book. In short, the St. Thomas Christians of Kerala had blended well with the world of Eastern churches and with the changing socio-cultural environment of their homeland. Thus, the Malabar Church was Hindu in culture, Christian in religion, and Judeo-Syro-Oriental in terms of origin and worship. When we talk about the relationship of the Nasranis group, then the facts come in line is, according to the 1st century annals of the Pliny, the elder and the author of the Periplus of the Therian Sea, Mujiris in Kerala could be reached in 40 days' time from the Egyptian coast purely depending on the southwest monsoon winds. The Sangam works, Puranaruru and Akananuru have many lines which speaks of Roman vessels and the Roman gold that used to come to the Kerala ports of the great Chera king in search of pepper and other spices which had enormous demand in the west. The lure of spices attracted traders from the Middle East and Europe to the many trading posts of Kerala Putriya, that is the Kerala, Taindis, Punani, Muziris near Kodungalur, Nelenda, Niranam, Bakara, Belitha, Kumari, that's Kanyakumari. Long before the time of Christ, Saint Thomas, the apostle in one of these ships, arrived at Mujiris in AD 52 from Ezion Jiber on the Red Sea. During his stay in Kerala, the apostle baptized the Jews and some of the wise men who adored the infant Jesus. The apostle also preached in other parts of India. He was martyred in AD 72 at Little Mounds, a little distance from St. Thomas Mount, and was buried at St. Thom near the modern city of Chennai. The apostle established 7 churches in Malabar at Kodungalur, Paravur, Palayarur, Kokamangalam, Niranam, Chayal and Kollam. The visit of the apostle Thomas to these places and to Mylapore on the east coast of India can be read in the Ramban song of Thomas Ramban set into Mogg 1500. Several ancient writers mention India as a scene of St. Thomas' labor. There are other passages in Indian liturgies and martyrologies which refer to the work of St. Thomas in India. These passages indicate that the tradition that St. Thomas died in India was widespread among the early churches. Alexio de Manzit, Archbishop of Goa from 1595 until his death in 1617, decided to bring the Kerala Christians to obedience after the death of Bishop Mar Abraham, an obedience that they conceived as complete conformity to the Roman or Latin custom. The Portuguese refused to accept the legitimate authority of the Indian hierarchy and its relation with the East Syrians, and in 1599 at the Synod of Diamper, the Portuguese Archbishop of Goa imposed a large number of Latinization. The Portuguese succeeded in appointing a Latin bishop to govern the Thomas Christians, and the local Christians' customs were officially anathematized as heretical, and the manuscript were condemned to be either corrected or burnt. The Portuguese padroado, that is a patronage, was extended over them. So from 1599 up to 1896, these Christians were under the Latin bishops who were appointed either by the Portuguese Pedroado or by the Roman congregations of propaganda. Fight. Even every attempt to resist the Latinization process was branded heretical by them. Under the indigenous leader Archidecon, the Thomas Christians resisted, but the result was disastrous. The oppressive rule of the Portuguese Pedroado provoked a violent reaction on the part of indigenous Christians community. The first solemn protest took place in 1653, known as Kunan Kurishu Satyam, Kunan Cross Oath. Under the leadership of Archidecon Thomas, a part of the Thomas Christians publicly took that oath in Matancherry, Cochin, and they would not obey the Portuguese bishops and the Jesuit missionaries. In the same year in Allangard, Archidecon Thomas was ordained by the laying on the hands of the 12 priests as the first known indigenous metropolitan of Kerala under the name Mar Thoma. After the Kunan Cross Oath between 1661 and 1662, out of the 116 churches, the Catholics claimed 84 churches and Archidecon Mar Thoma won with 32 churches. The arrival of Mar Gregaries in 1665 marked the beginning of association with the West Syrian Church. Those who accepted the worst Syrian theological and liturgical tradition of Mar Gregorius became known as Jacobites. About St. Thomas Christians, by the process they got divided into East Syrian and West Syrian. I'll just explain you that St. Joseph Monastery, Mananaram, where mortal remains blessed, Chavara are kept, St. Thomas, a cross is seen in the picture on the top of the church. In 1772, the West Syrians, under the leadership of Kattu Mangatu Abraham Mar Korilus, Metropolitan of Malankara, formed the Malabar Independent Syrian Church. In 1876, those who did not accept the authority of the Patriarch of Antioch remained with Thomas Mar and chose the name Malankara Mar Thoma Syrian Church. They removed a numbered practice introduced at the Synod of Diamper to the liturgy, practices, observances. In 1961, there was a split in this group with the formation of St. Thomas Evangelical Church. However, in 1912, due to attempts by the Antiochian patriarchs to gain temporal powers of Malankara Church, there was another split in the West Syrian community. This was not accepted by those who remained loyal to the patriarch. The two sides were reconciled in 1958, but again differences developed in 1975. Today, the West Syrian community is divided into Malankara Orthodox Syrian Church in Oriental Orthodox Communion, Jacobite Syrian Orthodox Church in Oriental Orthodox Communion. In 1926, a section of West Syrian under the leadership of Mar Ivanius came into communion with the Catholic Church, retaining all of the church rights, liturgy and autonomy. They are known as Syro-Malankara Catholic Church. Now, what is the shape of Christianity in India 40 years after Christ? Christianity originally came to India before it reached Europe, as we all know. It is supposed to have reached India between the 1st and 3rd century of our era. But these early attempts to introduce Christianity into the country could make any major dent. Only small pockets in the south were converted, and today's Syrian Christians mainly are from Kerala or some parts of Tamil Nadu. These Christians mostly come from Nambudri Brahmin caste of Kerala. They represent an interesting sociological entity. Devout Christians as they are also stout-hearted nationalists with a strong Malayali identity, which translates to a strong national identity, which is purely Indian. Hypothetically speaking, if all Indians had been converted by the Apostle St. Thomas to Christianity, all Indians might have been like the prototype Syrian Christian community, Christian yet specifically national. The condition of the Portuguese who brought Christianity to Goa. Let's cover certain important aspect of that also. Christianity as Catholicism was introduced in Goa in a large way in 15th century by the Portuguese colonists. The Portuguese were Roman Catholics. When they reached Indian shores, they were still under the influence of crusades. And in inquisition of the early centuries of their rule in Goa, Daman and Diu, they didn't make use of the force to effect conversion of the native Hindus to Christianity. A part of the early converts to Christianity were a result of taking of Indian wives by the Portuguese officials. These converts were termed mestizos, or mixed blood. To these were added the progenies of extramarital relations between the colonial officials and the natives' women folk. The offsprings of such relations were brought up as Roman Catholics. These facts have been recorded in the Portuguese records of the colonial period. The occurrence of aquiline features of fair skin in some Goan Christians' families seems to be an inheritance of such relations. In the early part of the Portuguese rule, the colonialists are also recorded to have forcibly converted temples into churches. As British and American missionaries spread out from Delhi into the heartland of Punjab, their preconceived ideas about Hinduism and Islam broke out rapidly as they established institutions requiring the close cooperation of Indians. 2/3 of foreign missionaries who entered the Punjab were women, and issues of gender as well as the race were central dilemmas in a cultural encounter that featured numerous irresolvable conflicts. The missionaries' commitment to Christians' universalism clashed with the visible realities of their imperial privileges. Although determined to build multi-racial institution based on spiritual equality, missionaries were the beneficiaries of an imperial racial hierarchy. Their social encounters with Indians were exceedingly complex, involving intimacy and affection as well as affronts and betrayals. Missionaries were compelled to react to circumstances not of their own making and were forced to negotiate and compromise with Indian Christians, government officials, Indian critics of the missionary movement, and many non-Christian students, patients, and a staff at large, influential missionary schools, colleges, hospitals, etc. In villages, university-educated clergymen who had hoped to convert the Hindus and the Muslim elite found themselves in surprising position of advocating the rights of stigmatized and oppressed rural laborers. The history of elite institution buildings took surprising turns during the rise of national movement as missionaries struggled with the conflict between their own transparent entanglement with imperialism and their attempts to foster new forms of indigenous Christianity that would outlive British imperial rule. It is well known generally that the Portuguese observed strict racial segregation and followed a policy of discrimination against all native Indians, whether Hindus or Christians. The immigration of some families of Goan Christians to Mangalore in 16th century was a result of discriminatory treatment by the Portuguese. Even today, there exists a significant Konkani-speaking Roman Catholic community around Mangalore. The third segment of Indian Christians are the Protestants. They form a minority among the Christian community and are a result of Protestant missionaries. The British colonists largely kept away from proselytizing the activities. Conversion to Christianity during British rule was mostly due to the activities of the missionaries. Indian Christians have generally not lived a barrack-like existence like the Muslim. There has been a significant social interaction between the Hindus and the Christian. The feeling of animosity that exists, the Muslims has been absent in the case of the Christian. As almost all Indian Christians are converted from Hinduism, they display many traces of their pre-conversion culture. So let's cover a few details about Hindu customs among the Christian community in India. To begin with, Indian Christians, especially the Protestants, have still preserved the surname of their pre-conversion days. In many cases, they also have Hindu first name. This makes them completely identical with the Hindus, at least externally. The reason could partly lie in the fact that many converts to Protestant Christianity were voluntary ones and belonged to the upper section of Hindu society. The conversion of the Reverend Vaman Narayan Tilak is one example. These voluntary converts to Christianity turned to that religion consequent to philosophical speculation. It's natural for such converts to preserve a strong nationalist identity in spite of the conversion. Marriage customs among the Indian Christians. Among all segments of Indian Christians, the aspect of their social life which has preserved their Indian roots as a manner of celebrating Christian festival, especially Christmas and their dress habit. During Christmas and New Year festivities, it's common among Indian Christians to burst crackers, light lamps, exchange sweetmeats, draw designs with colored powder outside their doorsteps, etc. All these practices have been a carryover from the Hindu festival of Diwali. If one goes to a Roman Catholic wedding, one would see that a day before the wedding is to take place, the groom and his best men are given a special bath by the groom's relative. In this bath, the groom and his best men are smeared with milk, egg yolk and scent. This custom is no doubt borrowed from the Hinduism, where the groom is given a bath with sandalwood paste and turmeric powder a day before the wedding. The Christian practice of the best men pulling a cord to release a shower of tiny colored thermocol balls on the bride and the groom during the wedding festivity come very close to the Hindu custom of throwing vermilion colored grains of rice on the couple during a traditional Hindu wedding. Even after the wedding or after a death in the family, Christians in Goa follow the practice of mass feeding of beggars and poor people. This custom seems to be a carryover of the Hindu custom of feeding Brahmins and poor people during any important social or religious function. If we talk about the caste system among the Indian Christians, then conversion to Christianity has not erased the caste system before the Christians. So Christians still privately continue to refer to themselves by their caste affiliation, like Prabhus, Brahmins, Kolis, Bhandaris, etc. And caste consideration are rarely absent during matchmaking, especially among Christians in rural areas. Some Christians converts who were Brahmins originally still in some cases wear the sacred thread, though their number is very less. But Christians commonly wear the black thread around their wrist as a good luck charm, as do the Hindus. The belief on an evil eye and other taboos persists among the Christians, and the method of warding off the effect of an evil eye, drishti, as it is known among Hindus, nazar, it's called among the Muslims, is by circling a pinch of salt and chili powder around the person who is believed to have been affected. Indian culture treats guests as God, serves them, take care of them if they are a part and parcel of the family. True? Respect one another is another lesson that is taught from the books of Indian culture. All people are alike and respecting one another is one's duty. It tells us that by all this we can develop cooperation and better living amongst ourselves and subsequently make this world a better place to live in. So thus we have seen how there has been a massive socio-cultural interchange between various religions in India. And this interchange has given us our national culture, which is a complex pattern into which have gone many diverse elements, foreign as well as indigenous. However, despite the composite nature of Indian culture, Hinduism remains by far the most powerful and pervasive element in Indian culture. Those who lay great stress on composite nature of Indian culture frequently ignore the basic fact. Caught up in their enthusiasm for the idea of the cultural synthesis, usually with the best of motives of strengthening communal harmony, national unity, they seem to suggest that the cultural fusion is of a kind which might have resulted from the blending of the indigenous and foreign element in equal proportion. This, of course, is simply not real. Donald Eugene Smith, an American scholar of Indian secularism, has observed, Hinduism or Indian cultures indeed provided the essential genius of Indian culture, can't be denied. Smith accepts the fact that Indian culture has indigenous as well as non-Indian element. In this context, he says thus, while not denying the reality and importance of composite culture, we must be prepared to deal with an Indian culture largely rooted in Hinduism. That's the reason we have made all those people who came from all the countries, like the followers of Christianity, Parsis, as a part of our existing culture, that they themselves consider them an integral part of India. India is really following its uniqueness of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. Thank you.